Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. AI in games often has many different jobs it can do. The AI could simply walk between certain points, like walking around the block. That's how some Grand Theft Auto games do it, where the AI will just walk around the block infinitely. Some other games like Fallout will give people set destinations where they can walk. So they may walk into the bar, they may walk home, depending on the time of day, little bits like that. Those type of AI typically use something like smart objects, where they will go to a destination and interact with it. They'll sit on a bench. Now, for patrolling guards, like in Batman Arkham Asylum, where they'll walk around the location, you could have them with smart points on point A, point B, but it can get very messy if you're adding smart objects everywhere, where you don't want all AI to deal with it, you only want the ones who are patrolling to deal with it. It's a bit messy if you want to go down that route. What a much preferred way to do is to start laying out waypoint systems and patrol points, where the AI can just simply walk around the loop. You can then code it in if you want to go off and use smart objects later. That's something we'll do in another tutorial. But in today's tutorial, we're going to look at making our own patrol point system, where we can tell an AI, here's your patrol point, or find the nearest patrol point, follow it, and they'll just follow it in a loop, or follow it to a destination and then do something. So let's get started. So I've seen quite a few tutorials on making patrol points, and mine is going to differ in a certain way. That most of the patrol points I've seen come in two flavors. That you'll have a parent patrol point that will know about each individual child, and then you'll have a bunch of children waypoints. Now these are okay if you want basic, straightforward patrol points. So for example, if we were to go around this building, that would work okay. You have a single parent, you have a bunch of children, it works. However, what I'm going to do instead is make each individual child their own patrol point and then just leave it at that. And the reason I'm doing this is it gives us a lot more flexibility. So if we had a patrol point here on this decking and it walked down here, well, we've got 3 branches to go. With the conventional parent-child system, this can get really confusing. You can do it, but then you've often got children of children of children, and it's just messy. Whereas the patrol point system we're going to make, because each individual child looks after their own paths, if you wish, we can just put a single node in the middle of here, and it can branch off all 3 directions if it needs to go down multiple patrol paths. Now, I'm not saying our entire AI is going to be patrol driven, but having a guard who patrols that way or that way or that way, and you might want him to randomize which way he goes. Sometimes you might go inside the house. This system allows for that, but it equally gives you the flexibility to just do your own as well. The other benefit of it is at any moment, if a guard, say, arrives here and then wants to start patrolling it, you don't need to get the nearest patrol point, find the parent of it, and then go from there. You can just grab hold of that patrol point and say, start following this. There are some advantages to this method because it's more flexible. So where are we going to start? So let's start with the one and only blueprint we need. So I'm going to come into my blueprints folder and I'm going to go into my NPCs folder. I'm going to come into my AI folder here where I've got the rest of my AI stuff because the patrol point is for the AI. And I'm going to create a new blueprint class and I'm going to just simply set it to an actor. And I'm going to call it BP underscore patrol point and I'm going to open it up. So the way I described it during the intro is each patrol point is going to know what it connects to rather than having a single parent connect to it. So what I'm going to do in the variables is I'm actually going to come and add a variable of the patrol point. I'm going to add the variable and I'm going to call it next points. And I'm going to set it to a type of the blueprint BP patrol point. I'm just also going to make it an array. So each patrol point is going to have a forward direction and a backwards direction. So the forwards direction is any patrol point if you're walking forwards around the loop that you want to go to. So if you're walking from this pier to here, the forwards directions will be that way, that way, that way, or that way. You don't want him randomizing and going back up the pier. So back up here will be the previous points. So then each patrol point, no matter whether you're going forwards or backwards, knows where it needs to go. So if I go into the patrol points and I've made sure I've made it instance editable with the eyeball, I'm going to duplicate this with Control or Command D and I'm going to add previous points. Now you might be thinking, why don't we just have one array that controls all points and it just doesn't choose itself? And whilst you can do that, the reason I'm not doing it, part of this tutorial is we're going to make visualizers for the patrol points showing which directions they consider forwards and which directions they consider backwards, which will greatly help us when we have debug issues later with AI if they're going the wrong way or they're not connecting to something. With the visualizers we're going to create, it will literally show you in different colors which way is forwards, which way is back. And that's all the variables we need. So next, let's make our visualizer actually visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and add a cube, just like so. I'm going to shrink it down to probably about 0.3, just so it's nice and small. And I'm going to make sure it's not on the ground. I'm going to lift it up. And the reason I'm not putting it on the ground is if we drag our patrol point out here, if it was on the ground, you wouldn't see the cube properly in all instances because it'd be like that. It'd be a bit silly. You can't really use it. It's not very visual. That's why I'm going to float it above there like that. We're going to make some changes now which will hide it in game and basically mean it's not going to be detected. It's not going to take up any performance, nothing. I'm going to come back to patrol point. In the cube, I'm going to make sure I search for shadows, and I'm just going to turn off all shadows that it's got. We don't need any of them. I'm going to search for nav mesh as well because we don't want it taking up navigation. I'm also going to search for collision, and I'm going to turn off overlap events, can't step up on, and no collision at all. You can also look for physics. That shouldn't be enabled by default. Yeah, physics, I can turn gravity off. I can just basically turn everything off. It doesn't need anything on, really. The only other thing I will do is I will come into hidden in game and I will tick it like so. And now if we compile and save, you'll see everything looks the same. But if you press the G key to simulate game mode, you'll see it disappears. There's nothing there, which is absolutely perfect. Because then we can use this in the editor and we can label out where our patrols are. That when we play the game, you won't see them or interact with them in any way. So a key thing for our patrol visualizers is it needs to show the forward direction. Because if we've got next points and previous points, if your patrol point's rotated weirdly, you might not be able to line it up properly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and add an arrow, which is just like the cube. It's a debug only. It's only available in the editor. I'm just going to make sure I put it just inside the cube facing forwards like that. And now we have a perfect way to say which way is forward on our cube. So I can see that forward is up that path there. So I'm probably actually going to come and move that out of the way a little bit like so. And while the white cube is okay, let's just make a really nice quick material to make it nicer. I'm going to come into my content drawer. I'm going to right click and I'm going to create a new folder and I'll call it materials. And I'll right click material, and I'll call it mat_patrol point. And I'll open this up. I'm just going to make this very, very quickly. So all I'm going to do is click on my mat patrol point and I'm just going to come and set the shading model to unlit so it's not affected by shadows. We don't need that. I'm just going to come and set the blend mode to translucent just so it can be invisible. Then I'm going to set the opacity. So I'm going to hold the S key and click to add a parameter, and then I'll just call it opacity and I'll drag that into the opacity here. I'll set it to something like 0.3 so it's slightly invisible because that's what we want. And then I'll probably just set the emissive color. I'll hold the V key and I'll click to add another vector parameter and I'll call it color, and I'll just connect the top color into the emissive and I'll set this to probably like a green just so it's debugly visualized like so. What we can also do is just drag off of this and add a multiplier node and I'll connect it up there and I'll just set this to like a 5 just so it glows and we can see it because it'll work. Click apply and wait for it to finish, and then we can come back to our patrol point, click on the cube, and then we can set the material to the MAP patrol, and there you go. Now it'll glow and be slightly invisible. There you go. So now you can see the patrol point stands out. If you press the G key, it completely disappears. It doesn't use shadows. It doesn't do anything like that. Look. So now it's just purposely for visualizing, but you can see it nice and easy. So now let's crack on with actually making the visualization. And by that, what I mean is showing which patrol points link to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag these and just orient it in a way to make a small little cube walk around, just a very small patrol path. And once we've done it, we'll come back and we'll add a proper path towards the end. I'll just duplicate these. I'm making sure that they're rotated whichever way they need to be to the most accurate patrol point. You don't have to rotate it, but it will make the visualizer work like so. So now you can see each patrol point is pointing to the next patrol point. Obviously, if you've got multiple, say going up there, just point it roughly in the middle of it. That's fine. And then one thing I am going to do is I'm just going to make sure I drag these up and hit the end key just to make sure they're on the floor. The floor point doesn't matter. When we code our AI, we're just going to say get the X, Y position of it. The Z position doesn't matter because the AI will take care of themselves for that. So now this is the point where we jump into the construction script. If you've never used a construction script before, it will only ever run when the blueprint is first added. So we're going to drag all our patrol points into our editor and it will run once, but then when the actual game runs, it's not going to run again. If we change the blueprints, it will then run. So we can add stuff into here that we kind of only want to run when the actor first spawns. So the way I'm going to visualize this, I'm actually going to create splines which aren't rendered in game, which is perfect, between this point and then all of the next point. And then that'll cycle around all of there. But what I'm also going to do is go from the current patrol point to the previous one as well. So we can use one color to show this is the forwards direction and another color to show this is the backwards direction. So we can easily map points around the map, and we can even create one-way roads if you really want to. So for example, if you walk through a door, you can't walk back through it, you have to go around. We can create points like that, which is another benefit. So where the difficulty comes in with our visualizer is because we've got an array of previous points and next points, at any moment we could add 1 or 20 of them. And a spline can't branch off to multiple places. It's like a wire. It's got to only go in one way. You can't splice it off. So we need to dynamically create splines so this has a point where it can star off and and connect to as many points as it needs to. Each of our spline points will only ever have 2 spline points on the spline, 2 nodes, the start and the end. And it means we don't have to worry about curves and all the other stuff to do with splines. So the first thing we need to do is, in our construction script, is we need to work out how many spline points we actually need. I'm going to drag the next points in and the previous points as well. From here, I'll drag off and do length, and I'll do the same for the previous. And then what we can do is we can add these two together, and it will tell us how many splines this control point is supposed to have. And because we'll use this later, I'm actually going to drag up, and because the construction script is a function, we can declare local variables. So things that will only run when the construction's running, but not when everything else is. And I will call this total points. And that's going to be how many splines we actually need to add dynamically to our control point. Next, because we're going to be dynamically adding patrol points into our blueprint, we need to clear off any existing ones. I'm going to drag the cube in, and I'm going to drag off of the cube and do get child components, and make sure you do the get children components, the array version. We don't need to check the sentence, so I'm going to ignore that. And then we're going to loop over with a for each loop on all the children. Now you will notice that we have put the arrow inside of the cube. That was a mistake on my part. Let's just drag it back to the default scene root and click attach just to take it out. Otherwise it will delete the arrow. We don't want that. One thing I will mention about the construction script is because this runs in editor, you don't need to build your game to make it run. If you start deleting stuff in the blueprint, it will be gone for good. There's no way to kind of recover that. I don't think Control Z will recover it. So just be careful with what you do with the construction script. It's easy to slow down your editor if you put big things into it, but luckily our system is going to be quite lightweight. Now that we've got all of the splines that will be inside the cube, let's just destroy them because we don't need them anymore. So we can drag off array element and do destroy component like so, and connect it to the loop body. What we could do to make it even more efficient is we could technically check how many children the cube has compared to the total points, remove if we've got too many, add if we've got too little. That might make it easier than destroying all and creating it, and it could be something we'll look at in the future, but right now we don't need it, so we're going to ignore that one. Let me know if you'd like me to do a tutorial on that. So now that we've got this, on the completed is where we can actually start creating the splines and start telling them where to go based on the next points and the previous points. So what I'm going to do, instead of building it all in here, because we need to do it twice, we need to do it all for the next points and then all for the previous points. Because for the previous points we need a different color, it needs to go in a different position. So we're going to create a function to draw the splines where we just give it an array saying take care of this. So I'm going to come to my functions, add a new function called draw splines, and I'm going to click on this draw splines here, and then we're going to add some basic inputs to it. So the first inputs is going to be the array that we need to look at. So it's either going to be next points or previous points. Now these are both patrol point arrays, so we can just use that generically. So I'll click inputs and I'll call it points. I'll set the type to be patrol point, and I'll make sure it's set to an array as well. Next, what we need to look at is the distance that we need to draw the line. So if we're going to be drawing a line from this point here, over to the next point, and this one will be drawing one back to the previous point, if they're in the dead center, you'll have a conflict where half of it's one color, half of it's another. It won't look very well. So what we can do is actually separate it off. So what I'm going to do is when it's going next, I'm going to give it a distance and say, come over to the left a little bit and render this side, and it'll go to the left side of this one. And then this previous one will go from the right side and it'll come to the right side of this. So we can clearly see the lanes that it's moving, and it'll make it really easy to visualize. So what I'm just simply going to do is add into the inputs here a distance. So I'm going to call it between distance, and it's going to be a type of float. I'm going to set it to a single like so. And next we need a color for what we're going to set the lines to. So the actual splines, you can choose what colors you want. I'm just going to come and call this line color, and it will be a type of linear color, and it'll be the blue one here. So we'll just hit compile and save just in case. So we're actually just going to do this draw splines in 3 easy steps. The maths behind it gets a bit funky, but I will try to explain it the best I can while we get there. But the first step is we actually just need to create the spline components, because at the moment we don't have it. You might have used the spline before, where you just add it, then you can come in, you can see they've all got splines and you can move it, but we're going to automate that. We're going to automate the add-in, we're going to automate the positioning of it. So let's just delete this spline off like so, and I'm going to loop over the points here. So I'll just come and do for each loop like so. So this points has got this is the total amount of points that we need to add for the next or the previous points, so let's just call it 1 for now. And I'm going to promote this array element to a local variable, and I'll call it current point. We're promoting it here because we're going to use it later when we're telling the start and the end points of the spline where to go. So we'll need to connect to the point we're looking at. After this, we can now add the spline, and it's as simple as typing add spline component like so. So I'm going to come down to the relative transform. I'm going to right click and click split, because then it gives it all defaults, because we just want it 0, 0, 0 inside this cube here, which is fine. Then I'm going to promote this spline to another local variable called called current spline, and that's so we can actually tell it what to do, where to go, adjust its points. And then finally, we actually need to attach it to the cube so it's in the correct place. I'm going to drag off of the current spline here, and I will just do attach component to component. And you can see automatically wanting to select cube, which is perfect. So we'll just click that. And then we'll just connect cube to the parent like so. So now this spline, we're attaching it to the parent of the cube. So we're going to add the component inside this cube. We don't need a socket name. The location rule, I don't want to keep it 0, 0, 0 relative to the world, which is where we added it there. So I'm just going to snap to target, which basically centers it inside the cube, and everything else we can ignore. We don't care about the routine. And then finally, let's just set the color of the spline. So I'm going to drag in current spline like so, drag up, and I'll do set unselected spline segment color. So that's quite a mouthful. Basically what it does is the unselected color is the spline that you're just looking at it. You've not clicked it, and we're just going to set the default color. If you want to set any of the other colors, you can just come and do set spline color, and you can see you've got selected, unselected, and there's a few more as well that you can do. Set tangent color. I'm not going to bother with any of those. And the segment color is going to be our variable line color. So a shortcut of a function, which is very nice. You can just drag off and do get line color. You can just get any of the variables, and that's it. So let's just comment this in so we know what it does, and I'll just call it create spline. There we go. So we've cleared it up outside of this. Inside the construction script, we've removed all the old ones. Then inside draw splines, the first thing we do is create all the new ones. Perfect. So after this, after we've set the spline, we now need to tell it where to go. So a spline, when it's first created, has 2 points automatically, point A and point B. And we can visualize this. If I come and add a spline component again, just manually, you can see the spline already has 2 points, point 1 there and point 0 there. So all we're going to do is set point 0 to be in up the cube like that, and point 1, we're going to set it all the way over there to the next point. I'll come back in, I'll delete this spline off because we don't need it. I'll hit compile and save. So how do we actually set the position of the first spline point? And it's actually ridiculously simple. I'm going to drag in the current spline, and then I'm going to drag off and choose set location at spline point. And I'm going to connect this back to here like so. So the point index that we want to choose is the current points index. So it's going to be 0. That's the first one. The location is what we're going to plug into in a moment. But I'm just going to set the coordinate space to world. I'm also going to untick update spline. And the reason I'm doing this is we're about to set the starting point and then the ending point. We don't need to update the starting point and then update the ending point. We can just set the position, set the end position, then update both at the same time. It's just that little bit less processing it has to deal with. How do we get the location we want? So because we don't want it to be bang on in the center where this arrow is, we need to actually do a little bit of logic to move it off to the side a little bit, which is perfect, which is super easy. If we jump back into here, the first thing we're going to do is drag the cube in, because it's going to be a child of the cube. I'm then going to drag off of this and get the cube's world location. So the difference between relative location and world location is at the moment this cube's relative location is relative to the parent is 0, 0, 104 there. In the world here, this cube is not 0, 0, 104. It's currently like 15,000 bearing on 16,000. So that's the difference between world and relative. So world location is in your entire world. Relative is inside the blueprint you're in. So we want the cube's world location, so in the world, because that's where we're drawing the spline from. Then what I'm going to do under this is drag off and do get the right vector. And what this is going to do is no matter the angle of this cube, whether it's rotated or not, it will get the center of this cube and it'll say, give me the direction which is considered right for this cube. And that's going to be that way, right. If we rotate the cube, right will differ. So now we need to actually tell it how much to move across the right axis. So I'm going to drag off this return value and do a multiply node. And then I'm going to right click the bottom one and choose to float. And now it's a float, we can pass in our between distance. So I'll drag off of here and do get between distance. So what this is going to do now is it's going to spawn the spline in the center of the cube. It's then going to get the right distance direction, which is that way, and add on our distance. Then it's going to go pop across on the right scale here to either that side or that side, depending what value you put into it. Negatives will go this way, positives will probably go that way towards the right more. But having it at the side here will look a bit odd. So I think it'll also be better if we push it forwards a distance as well, which is super easy to do, just like we've done here. I'm going to drag off the cube and get the forward vector, and then I'm going to drag the multiply node again and then get the forward vector, and I'm just going to drag the between distance into here and it will automatically convert it over for us like so. And now if we add all three of these vectors together, it should spawn the spline, move it across to the right and move it forwards for us. So I can now drag off of this and just do a plus, and then I can drag the second pin in, and if you see this little add pin button here, just tap that and add the third one in like so, and then you can connect this up to the in location there. And that'll be our first point set to the correct position. So if we add a comment around this block of logic saying starting debug point, move to the right, then forward. forwards. And that's what that logic there is going to do. And now that we've done the starting point, we need to do the ending point. And it's pretty much almost very, very similar to what we've done. I'm actually going to come and copy all of this code here, and I'm just going to paste it over to this side and drag it into position here. I'll connect it up, and the index is going to be at number 1, so that'll be the next point. It'll still be world, but this time we will tick update spline because we want it to update it. And then down here, we'll just set this comment to be endpoint. And now this is where this one differs. Instead of getting the cube's location that we're currently in, we need to get the cube's that we're going to's point, which will be that one there. So what we're going to do is drag in our current point, which is the point we're looking at. So that'll be the next point or the previous point. And then I'm going to drag off this and I'm going to get their cube instead. And then I'm going to connect that into the get world location here. I actually make a little bit of space for this and just a little bit nicer, like so. But everything else will remain the same. So this other part here will actually remain the same. Because if we're here and we're going from the right side of this cube, if we were to go to the right side of this cube, well, this cube's rotated. So it would be in the center here. But we don't want it in the center there. We want it to be to the side of this cube here. So we're using our current cube's rotation to put it on the correct point on that cube. And that's pretty much it. That's all we need to do. And now if I compile and save and come back to the construction script, if I come to the end on the completed here, don't do it on the loop body, I'm going to come and drag in our draw splines function. So, and I'll connect it up to here. The points, I will give it the first one, which will be the next points. The between distance, you can really play with this. I want the next points to be on the left side, and then the previous points to be on the right side. That's just the way I like to work. But you can absolutely change it, and all you do is set this distance to minus if you want it to be to the left, or positive to be to the right. I'm going to set mine to minus 50, and the line color for the next nodes I'll set to green. Like so. Then I'm going to come and copy and paste this right next to it, like so. And instead we're going to run it for the previous points, like so. And then the distance this time I want it to be on the right, so we'll just do positive 50, and I'll set the line color to be red. And now, ladies and gentlemen, if you compile and save, you will see nothing changes. And the reason is we've not linked anything up together yet. So if we come and click our first node here, if we tap plus on both of these next points here, for the next point, I'm going to click the little pipette and I'll click on that one there. And then for the previous point, I'll click the pipette and I'll click on that one like so. Now you can see we now have green lines showing the next point over to this one, and then the red one showing the previous one over to there. So if I just go around now and set all of these up, so I'll come to this one, I'll click, I'll set the next point to be the third one, I'll set the previous point to be the previous one. You can see the lines are all now matching up perfectly. I'll do the same for this one. Next, the previous one will be that one, next one will be that one, and then for this one, previous one will be that one, and the next one will be, and there you go. And now we have a very basic waypoint visualizer where it's showing where all of the points are. So you can see from this waypoint, green means, oh, it can go up this way, and the red means, oh, it can also go down to this way. If you didn't want this cube to go down to this one here, you can simply come and untick the previous points like so, and it will disappear. So now when you look at this and you see, oh, it can go up and down there, but it can't go that way. So from a developer point of view, you've got all the information you need. I'm going to come and add that back in like so. So now with this really easy system, what you can do is basically start moving the waypoints wherever you want. If I come and drag this waypoint here, I'll drag it up this path over here to say I want him to patrol over here. I'll rotate this around. I'll make sure it's not in the ground, press the N key, and I rotate it around here like so. I'll grab this one, I'll move it all the way around here because that's where I want him to go. It's again in the floor, so I'll just drag him up and press the N key, and we'll rotate it so it's facing the correct way. I'll come and get the final node, and I'll drag it over here. We may need one more node, which is fine. I rotate it around like so, just so it's facing the right way, and I'll grab this node and I'll just put it in there. That'll be fine. Rotate it so it looks partially right, and then if we come back to our patrol point and just hit compile just to adjust them all again so they all run, you can see this one has got green or red paths up here, so it's allowed to come up here. This one is facing this way, so it's coming down around here as well, and then this one is coming over here. It's in the floor, so let's just drag that up, press the N key, there we go, and then it comes down to here and it shows us all the correct direction. Now there are absolutely loads of ways you can code this in to make it work however you want. You could even remove both splines and just have single splines to one another. You could remove the splines entirely, but I think this way really does nicely highlight when you come up to above as well. You can see exactly where the patrol points are. It does get a little bit flaky sometimes when you have weirdly rotated ones like this. Like if I was to rotate this perfectly, it would be correctly in line like so, but for me that's okay for now. If you know any better ways to do it, let me know below. We can always improve the system later on. However, you may have noticed it was a little bit flaky to come in here, add the next points, add the previous points. It got a bit long-winded. So if I want to add a point in between this one and this one, there's quite a lot of effort to do it. So I figure now would be a great time to look at creating our own editor script, and it's really easy to do. So what we can do is we can add special things, such as if we click a single node and have a button saying add spline after, it automatically duplicates the spline where we want it to be. It connects the previous point to it, it connects the next point to this one, and it works really, really well. We can also do other things like, and say, if we've got 2 points selected and we click a button saying add point between, we can remove the variables and set the variables exactly how we want to, all from the editor script really easily. And it can just make it a lot nicer. So if we add a bunch of waypoints, and for example, on this one, we want it to also go this way, we can automatically do it from the editor script. So it's really easy to do. So the first thing you want to do though is make sure you've got it enabled. It comes with Unreal by default, so I'm going to click Edit, Plugins. I'm just going to search for Editor Scripting Utilities. It's marked as beta, but it's been marked for beta for ages. So just tick that one. You've also got a Python one, but I don't know how to use that yet, but that sounds really cool for something we might have to do in the future. And then I'm going to come back to my content folder here, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to create a new folder called Editor. And then I'll go into here, I'll right click, and I'll go to Editor Utilities, and I'll make sure I select Editor Utility Widget. The difference between Blueprint and Widget, Blueprint lets you right click on something and then select it from the options. So if you click on this node and right click, you will have an Editor Utilities option here. Whereas the widget one lets us create our own custom window. So we could create our own custom editor widget, just like the narrative navigator here, where we can give us loads of buttons that do stuff with whatever we've selected. I'm going to right click, Editor Utilities, Editor Utility Widget. I'm going to click Stack Box just because it's the easiest one to do. And I'm going to call it EUW for Editor Utility Widget, and I will call it Patrol Points. And I'll open this up. So it looks just like a normal widget system, and it basically is. So I'm going to come and add our first button, and I'll choose Editor Utility Button, and I'll just drag it inside here. I'll rename this to EUB for Utility Button, and let's do the first one where we add one afterwards. So I'll do add point after. Then I'll come and search for text, and then I'll drag the text inside here, and I will call this add patrol point after, like so. We'll sort the styling for this out later just to make it look nicer, but for now let's crack on with the code. So I'll click the button, I'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, and I'll click the on click like so. We don't need any of this up here, so we can go. So what do we actually want this to do? So the first thing we need is you need to have basically selected a patrol point, because if you haven't, then it's pointless. There's no need to actually let them proceed doing anything. I'm going to right click and I'm going to search for get selected level actors here. You may have to untick context sensitive, and we'll just tap that one. And then we can drag this and connect it inside this one here. And what this is going to do is get us all of the actors that we've selected in the world, whether it's the floor, the rock, the tree, anything. So we do actually need to give this a target. So really easily just drag off and choose get editor actor subsystem, which is something built into Unreal. Now to test if this is working, let's drag off this return value and do a for each loop. And then from the loop body, just drag a print statement in. From the array element, drag into the in string to print the name out. Now if we click compile and save and click run utility widget, you'll see we have our widget here, our custom editor widget. If we go back to the landscape here, your map, and let's just clear the output log a moment, because if the output log's empty, if I select a bunch of actors, say the wall, the stairs, the house, and click add next patrol point, if we check the output log now, you can see it's printed all the stuff we've selected. We've selected the waypoint, which is the patrol point, landscape, square rock, the stairs, and the building. So there, we can click it and you can see it is indeed working. If we select 2 waypoints and click next, you can see it prints out 2 waypoints, which is absolutely perfect. Let's jump back into our editor utility widget here, and now we can delete the string off here. So now that we know this is working, the first thing we need to do is to add next patrol point can only ever really be added to a single patrol point. You click it, you add next to it to carry on. We don't want to be adding next to multiple because it can get a little bit messy if you forget about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag off this return value and say get length, and then I'm going to say it must equal 1. So you can only ever select 1 at 1. Of course, if you want the ability to select multiple, then just replace this with a for each loop. But the other benefit of doing it with just 1 is it means we can fine-grainedly choose what we've selected. So I'm going to drag off this false here and say add a print statement. I will add an error. You have selected multiple actors. So we at least have an error message. If it's true, we then need to check if the one we've selected is actually a patrol point. So I'm going to come back to my functions up here. I'm going to add a function and say is only patrol points selected. And then inside here, I'm going to give it an array of patrol points, which will be the selected actors we've picked. And this will simply be just a generic actor at the moment. And then it's a type of array. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to loop over this array here, this for each loop. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to cast to the BP patrol point. And you might be thinking, Decryption, you said casting was bad. And it is for the most part. But the reason we don't cast is because it ties whatever blueprint you're casting to and the current blueprint together in memory all the time. The editor utility blueprints aren't shipped in games. They're editor only. When you build your game, it's removed. So the casting doesn't matter in this instance. If you were casting to a ridiculous amount of blueprints, say hundreds, then I'd consider using interfaces instead. But because we're in an editor utility blueprint, it can afford to be a little bit lazy. So that's okay. And I'm going to say at any point, if we cast failed, it means we've not selected patrol points or we've selected other patrol points as well. So I'm going to come in and instantly add a return node from that. For the return node, I'm simply going to add an array of return patrol points, but this will actually be a type of patrol point like so. So what we can do is actually return the converted patrol points ready for us to use. If at any moment it's cast failed, we just return nothing with fail. It's broken basically. So I can drag off this with cast failed as well, add a print statement, and I will say error non-patrol point found, something like that. But if it's true, then we know we need to add it to an array ready to return. Let's click our local variables here and add a local variable called converted patrol points, and I'll set it to a type of patrol point, and I'll make sure it's set to a type of array. And then we can drag this array in, drag off of it and do add, and we can connect it to here, and we can also connect it to the cast result like so. If it gets to the end of the completed and it's not errored, it means we can just simply return the converted patrol points like so. So now this function, whether we give it one actor or many actors, will simply tell us whether or not we've only selected the patrol points we need, which is perfect. I'll come back to event graph. On the true of our branch, I will drag in our function, connect it up, I will connect it to the patrol points back here like so, and it will now give us a fresh, clean array of our patrol points. What I will also do, however, just to make it a little bit nicer, is I'll click our function and I'll add another output, which will be a success node, and I'll set it to a type of boolean and just a single. And then only on the part where it actually returns the patrol points converted, I'll tick success, and it just means over here we don't need to check the length again. We can literally just come in and add a branch like so. We don't need to add anything to false because we've already errored inside here, so that's all good. Then what we can now do is get the first return patrol point, because we're only dealing with one at the moment, which is what we've identified here. And now we can actually go off and do whatever we need to it. So we're adding a next waypoint, so that's really easy. So I'll drag off from the true, I'll do spawn actor from class. The world context object, I'll just drag off. I will just drag off and do get context, and you'll see get actor editor context subsystem. That'll just tell it which world you want to place it in. I technically think it's possible for you to execute an editor script from another level, but I don't know why you'd have to do that. Maybe you would. But yeah, so we'll just connect that just to get the current level. For the class, we will give it our BP patrol point, like so. The spawn transform, I'm actually just going to drag off the current one we're looking at, the selected one, and do get transform, actor transform, and I'll connect it up to spawn transform there. So it spawns it in the very same position, really. The collision handling will just set to always spawn, because that's what we want, and then we don't need to set anything else just for now. And if you imagine we've spawned in our new patrol point there, we've moved it out of the way just temporarily. What do we need to do to it? So we need to tell this that your previous node is this one, because we're spawning the next node. For this node, we need to tell that your next node, one of them, is this one. And that's really easy to do as well. So back in here, we'll drag off of our new node, and we'll do get previous points, like so. And we'll drag off of this and do add. And what do we want to add? We want to add the previous node, which is this one here. But one thing I'm thinking is while we're here is we're doing a lot of the same lines again. I'm actually just going to come and drag all of this here, and I'll right click and I'll do collapse to function, and I'll call it add next patrol points. Because now it's in a function, we can actually create local variables, and we don't need to worry too much about it. So all of this is okay, and checking this bit here. For this bit here, for the get part here, I'm actually going to come and promote this to a local variable and call it current selected point. We can connect this into the true like so. Then for this one down here, I'll just connect it to the target there, so that's one line removed. For the add over here, I'll drag in our current select, and now it just looks a lot neater. I'll also drag this across here. I'll promote this to a variable, and this will be be our new point. And I'll connect this over to here, connect this to the target so it removes it, and connect that over there. So now we don't have many lines overstretched from one another. It looks a lot nicer. So now we've added the previous point to the new spline point. We need to get the current selected one, and we need to get its next points, and we can add to this. And what do we want to add? We want to add the new point. Now we hit compile and save. I'll stop the utility widget and just rerun it again, just so we've got a fresh batch of code. And now I can try it. So let's say from this point here, I want it to be able to go across around the sunflower thing. I'm going to select the ground and click add patrol point. And you'll notice nothing happens. So let's just dock this in our layout here. You'll see error, non-patrol point found. Okay, so we've not selected a patrol point. That's good to know. So I'll select the fence and I'll do this. I'll click it again. Non-patrol point found. Okay. So I'll click this patrol point and I'll click add next button. And has it worked? Let's have a look. You can see we've got a patrol point here called patrol point now. We drag it off. We do indeed have a separate one. We go to the details. You can see the previous point is linked up to this one. And this one is indeed got two next points now, which links to our new patrol point. And now with this easy to use editor widget, which I'll just here for now, we can now come and drag this one all the way over here like so. You can see the arrows are indeed linked up. I can click add next patrol point, click the one above it, drag it down here, and there we go. It's nicely linked everything up. We can see the new patrol points being added nicely. Now one thing I'm thinking is every time we click add new one, it's selecting the old one still. It'd be nice if it automatically selects the new patrol point that we're going to be using. So let's see if we can do that. So I'm coming back to the editor utility script. At the end, once it's added both, I'm going to come back to the very beginning. I'm going to copy the editor actor subsystem, paste it in here, drag off of this, and I will do set selected level actors like so. Now it wants an array of actors that we want to actually select in the editor. So I'll drag off this array here. I will do mate, and then we'll connect the new point into it. And now with this, it should successfully select the new point that we've added. If I Alt J back into top view again, I'll make sure that I stop this running and run it again. I don't know if it's necessary, but it feels safer. So let's say I want him to patrol down here this time. I click add next, and then if I drag off, you should see we now have our new point selected, which is very nice. I'll spin this around. I'll make sure it's not in the ground. There we go. And if I come back to the patrol point, hit compile, you can see it's now updated successfully. That, ladies and gentlemen, it is working very nicely. We have now got a way to easily map it out. However, this patrol point here and this one here, I want to add one in the middle, and I don't want to have to go and edit the settings here. So let's add a new button to it. I'm going to come back to the edit utility patrol point. So we'll go back to the designer and let's fix this up. So let's see if I cut this button and add a vertical box, and we'll just paste it in there. It looks a lot nicer now. So I'll come in and I'll duplicate this button with the text, Control or Command D, and it's added it just below it. Look, we can even give it a little bit of padding. So we'll just select both of these, and I'll set the bottom padding to 50. Yeah, that's it. And I'll rename the bottom button to EUB underscore add patrol point in between. Yeah, you can come up with better names. Add between patrol point like so. There we go. So it's, you can see the keyword in the middle for mine. I'll click the button. I'll scroll down to the bottom. I'll click the on clicked, and then we can actually reuse most of the add next patrol point. Now I'm going to come and just Control or Command D that function, and instead of add next, add between patrol point. I'll come back to the event graph. I'll add this into this button here like so. And now let's go and modify it. So what do we actually need on this one? Oh, you can see it's updated already. We've got two buttons. Very, very nice. So we need two patrol points selected. We can't have more than two because it gets very confusing if you're adding it between three at that point. So that might be best left up to the developer to add it. I'm thinking if we select this patrol point and select this patrol point, then we can place it wherever we need to and then join them together. So let's come back to our editor blueprint, come into the add between points. So the first thing we need is if the length is equal to 2, then we can continue. The error will be you can only select 2 patrol points. So only patrol points selected, that is perfectly fine the way it is. So we do want to still get the first one, and then instead of current selector point, I'm going to rename this variable to first selector point, and I'm going to Control or Command D duplicate it, and I will call it second. Now you might think, why didn't you use an array for this? And if you were doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, connecting them together, use an array. For me, I'm just doing 1 and 2. I want to put it in between. So I'm just doing 2 variables because it makes it nice and easy to use. And I'm going to drag all this stuff to here, just over to the side to give me some more space. And then from the array here, I will drag off and do get again. I'll set it to a 1 to get the second one. Then I will drag in using holding the Alt key on the second selected point, and I'll connect it down here. So now we've got our first and selected points. We then do want to create the new point, just like normal. That's not going to change. So this is where we need to think about the logic, because the first item it's going to get here is going to be the first waypoint you've selected. So there's no real way for us to differentiate between whether we want that to be the first and the next point be our new one, one, or we want that to be the first and the next point to be our next one. What we can do is we can add a label to it shortly with some instructions, but the first actor you select is the order you want it to go. So if I say I want this one first, then this one, the next node will be our new node for this one here, and our new node will treat this as the previous, and then the second node will be the next node to our new node. I hope that makes sense. It's a little bit confusing, but okay. So if we're treating the first selected point as the first object we've selected, we do want to set our new points, previous points, to the first selected one. That's correct. So we can keep that. Then when we come to our first selected point, we do want to set the next points to our new one. That's okay. We don't need to worry about the selection just yet, so we'll move that all the way across a bit. But now we need to set the second point. So I'm going to move this one across a bit, and I'm going to grab our new point, and I'm going to get the next points. At this point, it'll be empty, but I'll drag up and I'll do add, and I'll connect it up over here, and then we do want the next point to be our second point. So now with just this bit, we've got a widget that's going to be spawned. It'll set the previous one to be here and the next one to be here. So now we just need to update these two selected nodes. For this one to say your next point is this one, and then for this one, your previous point is our new node. So we already have our first point's next point set up, so that one's correct. Then I'm going to drag in our second selected node, and I'm going to get the previous points. I'll drag off and I'll do add, and then we want to set it to our new point here. Say the previous node to you is our new point, and I'll connect it over to there, and now I can set the selected actors to our new point. You could do some logic to put it between the two nodes here. I'm not going to do that because it could get really flaky. If you select this one and you select this one over here, for example, it will put it in the middle of the house. That's going to be a bit weird. So I'm going to keep it, spawning it next to the first node, but it will select it at the end so we can just move it. So let's test it out. I'm going to claim our log, and by default, I will select the first one, then I will select the second one, which is just underneath that sign, and I will click add patrol point between. And if everything works, we should have a new patrol point selected and linked up to both. So we click add between, and you can see we have gone from two selections to one. I can now jump to my top view. I will drag it out here. I will make sure it's rotated forwards. You could also rotate it properly in the code as well. And if I come back to my patrol point and hit compile, you will see it is linked up. Has it done it correctly? Let's have a look. So we've got one previous point and one next point, which is correct. This one here has got two next points, so it's either that one or to that one, so that's correct. The rotations have messed up a little bit, but that's okay. That's just because of the way it's rotated. And this one over here has two previous points, so it can come up to there or up to there. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. We now have a very nice patrol point system set up. So with a few click of some buttons, we can come to this one. We can add a next patrol point. We can drag this down on here. That way we want it. Yeah, that looks okay. Is it rotated properly and is it on the floor? So we'll say we want it to go back up the hill now to this one. So we want to add one in between these. So I'll click it. I'll add between point. It gives me right here. I'll drag it in the middle of this hill. I'll rotate it so it faces the correct direction, which it is. I'll make sure it's not hitting the floor, and I'll click end. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we now have a very quick patrol point system to be able to set up. We can map out semi-decent areas with it without much hassle. And just by visually looking at it, you can see which ones are linked to which ones and where they are linked backwards and which direction. You can see this one here links over to here. Always follow the left side. You can see it links all the way down to here, and everything is looking nicely. So there we go, ladies and gentlemen. We have now covered in part one adding our basic patrol points that we can come in. At any moment, we can just press G to hide them and they're all gone. It's not going to affect the gameplay at all. It's nice and easy to use, but it gives us the maximum flexibility that we can come in and branch off as many places as we want. So in the next episode, we're going to look at actually making our AI follow these patrol points, and when it gets to a certain point, it will randomize where it wants to go. So if you're telling it to go forwards, it will go to each next point. So it'll get this one, it'll go over to this one over to here, and then when it gets to here, it will randomize between going that way or that way. And we can make it do all of this. And with our nav mesh set up, we don't even need to make it follow the lines. That's just for us. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this helps. Have you got any improvements you'd make? Would you visualize it in a different way? Would you even use the splines at all? Let me know in the comments below. If you've got any improvements, please let me know and we'll look at adding them. My name is Decryption. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.